The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a podcast which will be presented by Paxton, Jennifer, and Hannah. First, a little bit about Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of today, and he lived from July 4th, 1804 through May 19th, 1864. He was born and grew up in Salem, Massachusetts, but he went to college in Maine. Afterwards, he returned back to Salem, where he was born. Hawthorne grew up in a very poor family and also an extremely Puritan family, which is important to the novel. At first, he was hesitant to become a writer because it was a very unacceptable career path for the Puritans. Another important thing is that his great uncle was a judge in the Salem witch trials, and both the Puritan background and the Salem witch trials are influences that are seen throughout the entire novel.
The next section of the novel that we will be covering is the historical context. The first section of historical context that we will talk about are the Puritans. Puritans believed strongly that Satan was present in everyday life, trying to corrupt people with evil. Puritans were opposed to much of the Protestant church, and they also believed that dancing, music, holidays, and perhaps even writing as a career were frivolous and pagan-based, and therefore were evil and wrong in every way. Puritans believed that misfortunes in everyday life were punishment from God. Some of these misfortunes were things such as infant death or crop failure. The relevance to the story of the Puritans is that the Reverend Dimmesdale, the man that had an affair with the main character, was a Puritan leader. This is also ironic because he is supposed to be a highly religious man, but he has an affair and then, furthermore, insists on lying to the public about this, which is not very religious. The next sector of the historical context is the Salem witch trials. Witches were people who were thought to be possessed by Satan. The Salem witch trials were thought to be occurred around the year 1692. Peasants used witchcraft commonly to help with farming and agriculture. This was known as white magic, but it was later renamed dark magic and became associated with demons and evil. Often in witch trials, the accused were strapped to a chair over the river and lowered into the river until just before drowning. Then they were pulled back up. This was repeated numerous times until the person confessed. If a confession was obtained, the person was hanged. But if the accused did not confess, oftentimes the interrogation continued until the person drowned. The relevance to the story is that Mistress Hibbins, the sister to the governor of Salem, is a witch, a major opponent to the Puritans. The governor doesn't even notice, which is very strange because witchcraft was a major superstition by almost everyone in the town, and if you weren't suspicious of witches or didn't believe in demons, then you were considered to be against God. This is ironic because the characters who didn't notice that the witch was among them were the ones who were very well respected and religious in the town. The most famous witch trials were the Salem witch trials. The story of the Scarlet Letter takes place in Salem, Massachusetts, which is why this is very relevant. One quote that talks about witches in Salem is, "It might be, too, that a witch, like old Mistress Hibbins, the bitter-tempered widow of the magistrate, was to die upon the gallows." In this quote, you are forced to ask, does Hawthorne really believe that she's a witch? Or is he just going along with the thoughts of the community? The next section of the historical context is about women. As in many classical stories, women are thought to be below men. Women were supposed to hide their feelings and be docile and unrebellious. One quote from the story that talks about women is, "Pearl, who was the gem of her mother's unquit bosom, betrayed, by the very dance of her spirits, the emotions which none could detect in the marble passiveness of Hester's brow." Hester, the main character, was a good woman because she hid her feelings and kept to herself. But Pearl, her daughter, didn't hide how she felt, and she was seen as wild and rebellious child because of it. Next, we will move on to characters. The main character is a woman named Hester Prynne. Hester Prynne was a seamstress. This was her career path and how she supported Pearl, her daughter, and herself. Hester was a very beautiful woman, and she was married to a man who was much older than her. She was ashamed of her adultery, but she was not sorry, and she did not ask for forgiveness because she loved the man that she had an affair with. She was forced to wear a red letter A to label herself as an adulterer. She was married to Roger Chillingworth, but she was much, much younger than he. She had an illegitimate daughter from an affair with a man named Reverend Dimsdale. She was exiled to the outskirts of town after being humiliated. She is a very kind woman, she's very kind to people, and she gains popularity in the townspeople in a way, even though she is exiled. Hester is a very dynamic character. She doesn't beg for forgiveness for her sin because she loved the Reverend. She feels ashamed for her letter A, but it makes her a better person. She is kind, and in the outskirts of town, she is an outcast, so she has to mingle with other outcasts and unfortunate people. This changes her because before she was married to a doctor and had a good reputation. So once she was exiled, her whole life was forced into change. Even though she is extremely poor, she manages to help anyone in greater need. She is also a very tough woman. Hardship has driven out some of the more feminine traits, leaving rebellious attitudes instead. However, since she is the good woman of the story, she hides her rebellious feelings. However, these rebellious traits that she feels do come out and show themselves in Hester's daughter, Pearl. She earns respect and strength in the story by returning to the community and embracing her actions even after she got the opportunity to leave, and she continues to wear the red letter A, even though the townspeople, who currently love her, tell her that she no longer has to.
Next, we move on to Reverend Arthur Dimsdale. Brother Arthur Dimsdale is a highly renowned reverend in Salem. He has an affair with Hester, the main character, but he does not admit it to the people. He does not admit it because the people of the colony respect him and like him very much. He gets very high standings from these people throughout the entire story. So if he were to come out to the colony, it would be a huge shock and he would never be respected as much as he was, and his status would never be the same again. It is very ironic because he was extremely religious. He was a reverend and he taught the Puritans and he taught them how they should live, but he was an adulterer and a liar, and he went against everything that he preached. In the end, he wears a red letter A, even though he was never formally convicted and forced to wear the A.
Up next, we have Pearl. Pearl is the daughter of Hester and Reverend Dimsdale. She's very intelligent and she's very perceptive of ideas and knowledge beyond her age. Her personality is moody and somewhat rebellious and wild. Her name is ironic because her name is Pearl, which means innocent, but she's an illegitimate child and not very ladylike.
Next, we move on to Roger Chillingsworth, the other man in Hester's life. And he was a London doctor. He was very renowned, very intelligent, and he was particularly talented, probably because he learned medicine from the Indians. He spent a lot of time with the Indians, and they taught him. He was Hester's husband, and he is much, much older than she is. He leaves to find work, and Hester goes to the colony and is gone for 2 years. Later, he becomes ashamed of what happened to his wife and hides his past life. And throughout the story, he wants revenge on Dimmesdale and spends 7 years seeking this revenge.
Now we are moving into some of the more minor characters of the novel. We have Reverend John Wilson. He's the other Reverend in Salem, and the foil of Reverend Dimmesdale. He preaches condemnation and extreme punishment for sinners, unlike Dimmesdale.
One of the lesser but still important characters is Mistress Hibbins. She is the sister of the governor, who is Governor Richard Bellingham, and most importantly, she is a witch.
Now we have Governor Richard Bellingham. He follows the rules, and he doesn't know that his sister is a witch.
The final character that we will be discussing is the narrator. The narrator in the story is unnamed, but he is very important because he is the one telling the story of the Scarlet Letter 200 years after it takes place. The life and personality of the narrator are quite similar to that of Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of the Scarlet Letter. He is the surveyor of the custom house in Salem. He loses his job and decides to write the story of the Scarlet Letter from some documents that he found about the story in the attic of the custom house while he was working there. The narrator was a Puritan, or at least his ancestors were, and this made him uneasy about using writing as a career option. This could also show why he could be a parallel to Nathaniel Hawthorne's life.
Now we are moving on to plot. The book opens with Hester being introduced to the public as an adulteress. She is forced to wear an embroidered scarlet letter A on her chest as a symbol of her crime. The evidence of her indiscretion is her infant daughter, Pearl. Her husband has been away for 2 years, but Hester still has a daughter. Hester has to go on the adultery parade through town, showing her scarlet letter and her child. After the parade, she is forced to stand on a platform in front of the town for hours. During this time, Roger shows up in disguise. The townspeople question Hester about who the father of the child is, but Hester refuses to ruin the man's life. Afterwards, while Hester is back in jail, Roger pays her a visit. He tells her to keep her mouth shut about him being her husband and inquires about the father of Pearl. Hester will not tell, and Roger concocts a secret plan to seek out the father and then ruin his life. The only thing the townspeople know about Roger is that he was a doctor. Roger is extremely intelligent and quickly figures out that Arthur is the father of Pearl. For the next 7 years, Roger befriends Arthur and proceeds to get inside his head. On top of Roger's constant badgering, Arthur has started to notice pain coming from some strange red marks on his chest. Hester finds out about Roger's harassment towards Arthur. She cannot stand to see Arthur tortured, so she reveals Roger's identity to Arthur. Hester and Arthur form a plan to escape to England and have a normal life as a family. The plan falls through, though, when Arthur's guilt consumes him. He confesses his crime to the townspeople on the very platform where Hester was publicly shamed 7 years prior. He concludes his proclamation by ripping his shirt open simultaneously, revealing the red letter A mark on his chest. His grand finale is death by guilt, which we will talk about some more later. Roger dies about 1 year later, leaving all of his possessions to Pearl. Pearl and Hester can finally flee from their past, so they leave. But Hester eventually returns to the town and, by choice, resumes to wear the scarlet letter, even though the townspeople tell her she doesn't have to anymore. When Hester dies, she is buried next to Arthur, and they both have a letter A upon their gravestones.
Now we will be moving on to setting, and the timeline of the story is that the actual story was 200 years prior to the narrator's point of view. The main story actually took place in the 17th century during the years of 1942 through 1949. The location is Salem, Massachusetts, which is also home and growing up time for the author. So there's some connections. In Salem, Massachusetts, it was a very highly religious location. There was extreme Calvinist and Puritan beliefs. Also in Salem, dancing, music, and the celebration of most holidays were forbidden by the Puritans because they thought it to be pagan. Hymns were, not surprisingly, the only music that was allowed. The Salem Custom House was the tax building, and it is the place where the written story of the Scarlet Lover is discovered by the narrator.
The next section that we will be covering is the foster and analytical section of this novel.
First, we'll talk about symbol. Hester has to wear the scarlet letter A upon her chest, and this is because it is a symbol of her adultery, so the people of the colony can see her and understand her crime and what she has done. And it's a sign of her sins, but as she develops into a strong, compassionate, and capable female protagonist, the A takes on a completely new meaning. The A now stands for able, and Hester is able to handle anything thrown her way, and throughout the novel she demonstrates this new meaning of the letter.
The next section that we had covered in the analytical portion was based on color. The fabric letter A that Hester is forced to wear is described as being scarlet red with gold embroideries. The red on the letter A stands for blood, representing her sin, or it could represent deep, passionate emotion. There are many deep emotions throughout the story, such as her love for her daughter and the Reverend, or her deep emotions about her crime. The gold embroideries stand for the richness or wealth of her soul. Hester is a very kind and lovable person, and the gold and red letters show how even the best of people can make the worst of mistakes.
Our next element is faith. The Reverend has chest pains when he is trying to keep himself from admitting his guilt to the public. He continues to try to resist his guilt, but fate causes him to wear the red letter A in the end. He dies wearing a red letter A, even though he was trying to avoid the punishment all along.
Next, we will be talking about two situations of irony. The first is that Hester's forgiveness, and the town forgives Hester for her crimes because she is such a highly thought of woman for helping everyone, but somehow she can't forgive herself, and in the end she chooses to come back to the colony when she was given the chance to leave. The other situation of irony is the Reverend, and he is supposedly the most religious man in town, and he preaches the Puritans' beliefs, but he is one of the biggest sinners for his acts of adultery.
Next up, we have illness. Reverend Dimsdale was killed by his guilt, but it affected him like an illness. He got chest pains, phases of weakness, and his appearance faltered throughout the story, as the guilt ate away at his soul and also ate away at his physical body as well.
The next section of the novel that we will be discussing are literary devices. The first literary device that we have indicated is a metaphor. One metaphor used in the text is the quote, Poor little Pearl was a demon offspring. This quote means that the daughter of the main character was born in an evil way, so therefore she was evil through fate. Because Hester had Pearl through an affair, and she was labeled as an adulteress, this means that Pearl had to be evil because she was created through sin.
The next literary device is oxymoron, and an oxymoron is conjoining contradictory terms. We have the example from page 153, die daily, a living death. This is talking about Chillingsworth causing a living death to Dimmesdale each and every day because the very sight of Chillingsworth reminds Dimmesdale about his sins.
The next literary device is allusion. One of the references and allusions in the story is to the Bible. There is a quote, "Had there been a papist among the crowd of Puritans, he might have seen in this beautiful woman, so picturesque in her attire and mien, and with the infant at her bosom, an object to remind him of the image of divine maternity, which so many illustrious painters have vied with one another to represent. Something which should remind him, indeed, but only by contrast, of that sacred image of sinless motherhood, whose infant was to redeem the world." This quote shows the allusion to the Bible and the Virgin Mary, who gave birth to Jesus Christ, who came to save the world from sin. They are comparing her to Hester and her daughter Pearl. The next section we will be covering are voice elements used by the author.
Up first, we have tone. The tone of the novel is ironic in many parts, often contemplative and occasionally tinged with bitterness. Next, we have diction and syntax. The diction in the Scarlet Letter is very formal, and the syntax is made up of very complex sentence structures and phrases. This complex structure and word choice is utilized to represent the complex emotional struggles in the minds of characters, such as Hester's inability to forgive herself, but her unwillingness to feel regret for her actions. And our last one we have is imagery. One example of the use of imagery is when the author describes the prison in Salem as the black flower of civilized society.
The next section we will be covering in the Scarlet Letter are themes.
The first theme is revenge, and we have the quote, "Yea, woman, thou sayest truly," cried old Roger Chillingsworth, letting the lurid fire of his heart blaze out before her eyes. "Better had he died at once. Never did mortal suffer what this man has suffered. And all in the sight of his worst enemy. He has been conscious of me. He has felt an influence dwelling always upon him like a curse." Reverend Dimmesdale said this to Hester, talking about how her husband would want revenge on him for sinning against him and his wife through adultery.
The next theme is compassion and forgiveness. There is a quote, "Ah, but," interposed more softly a young wife holding a child by the hand, "let her cover the mark as she will, the pang of it will always be in her heart." One of the only women from the town feels compassion for Hester and is sorry that she will have to raise a child on her own and in such a state of ridicule.
Up next, we have punishment. The quote, "This woman has brought shame upon us all, and ought to die. Is there no law for it? Truly there is, both in the scripture and the statute book. Then let the magistrates, who have made it of no effect, thank themselves if their own wives and daughters go astray." The people of the town wanted Hester to be severely punished for her actions in this quote.
The important quote we have is, "Mother, said Pearl. Was that the same minister that kissed me by the brook? Hold thy peace, dear little Pearl, whispered her mother. We must not always talk in the marketplace of what has happened to us in the forest.
Pearl, in this quote, has noticed that the Reverend's appearance has changed in the last few days after they met in the woods to plan their escape. Now he is at the election festivities, and his looks have changed. This symbolizes a revolution in his life. He no longer wants to flee with the family, nor can he. Instead, he would like to start a new life as a well-respected man and be rid of his sin. Next, we will talk about current influences that the Scarlet Letter has had in society.
Our first influence is the movie Easy A. Easy A is about a high school class reading the Scarlet Letter. A girl pretends to sleep with a college guy for a better status in the school, and other people like nerds and geeks to help them out with their popularity status. They all see her as a slut, and she goes around wearing the red letter A, even though she never actually sleeps with anyone in the movie.
Another influence that the Scarlet Letter has had on society is in the Broadway musical The Music Man. One of the songs is called The Sadder But Wiser Girl for Me. In the song, there is a lyric that goes, I smile, I grin, when the gal with a touch of sin walks in. I hope and I pray for Hester to win just one more A. The song refers to Hester as the gal with a touch of sin and wants to get her another A, which shows how times have changed since the Puritan times. Now they actually want her to get another A, where at the time Hester was an outcast and ridiculed for it.
The